Okay, so we're going to start with squares. And when I say squares specifically, we're talking about the difference of two squares. So when you see the word difference in math, what do you think of? Subtraction, right. So this is going to be subtraction. And what do I mean by squares? Here I'm talking about perfect squares. So things like 4, 9, 16, 25. I have my list over here. You guys probably just need to know, I'd say at least up to 100 maybe. But this is 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9. Most of these things you already know, right? This is not new to you. Let's keep going a little bit so you have these in your notes. 49, 7 squared. What's 8 squared? 64. 9 squared? 10 squared? 100. Okay, now you can obviously find those in your calculator, but I want you to kind of start to recognize these numbers on this right side, because that's what you're going to see. You're going to see subtraction in the middle, and if you see perfect squares, then this is what we're going to do. Okay, so when you think of difference of two squares, think of an actual square is very simple, right? And it's going to have minus in the middle. Because when we do cubes in a little bit, it's a little more complex, so I don't want you to get confused. Squares are very simple. So the first one, let's look at x squared minus 9. So again, two terms on the board over there. That's what I wrote. Two terms. You're going to have squares or cubes. So this is squares. So underneath here, I want you to write what times what gives me x squared? Just x. Yeah, x times x is x squared. So I'm just going to write x. What times what gives me 9? 3. Okay, so here's what your answer looks like. You're going to make 2 parentheses.
4.
What? What's 4? Oh, 2 sets of parentheses. And then you're going to have an x minus 3 and an x plus 3. So here where I got x and 3, they both go in the parentheses, but one's minus, one's plus. And that's your answer. So if you were to multiply this back out, you could FOIL this. X times x is x squared plus 3x minus 3x minus 9. This cancels. And there you get x squared minus 9. Okay, so that's what we're going to do for most of today. So if we're going to add more numbers, we'll add more letters, but it doesn't get much worse than that. Stop. Okay, number 2, x squared minus 64. Okay, so I see the subtraction, and I see I have 2 perfect squares. So we already know this one is x. What times what gives me 64? 8. So you make your 2 parentheses. One has a minus in the middle, and one has a plus. Okay, number 3, 36x squared minus 25. So what times what gives me 36x squared? 6x. And to get 25? 5. So 6x minus 5, 6x plus 5. Not terrible, right? Hopefully. Number 4. X squared plus 100. Can I factor this one? Can I? see two squares, do I see the difference of two squares? No. So it has to be a subtraction in between here. So because it's not, and I can't factor it, what's our word for this? Prime. So you'll get going on your worksheet and you'll get to a plus and you'll just keep on going, and then it'll be incorrect because it's a plus and you can't factor that. It's already done. So just be cautious of that. Number 5. Okay, what times what gives me 4x squared? 2x. And how about for this one? 7y. So 2x minus 7y. Or you can put plus first and then minus, it doesn't matter. Number 6. I think I just have 2 more of these. Yeah. Oh, no, I have 3. Number 6. 8x squared minus 8. There hasn't really been any GCS for us to take out yet, but look at this one. What's common that we can take out? A 2, right. A 2 goes into both of those. So this is what you did yesterday. If we take out a 2, I'm basically dividing each of these by a 2. So what's left inside the parentheses? 4x squared minus 9. So this is where it comes in. You're always going to look for GCF first, but then look at what's left. I've got 2 terms, so that's where what comes in the board is going to be handy. 2 terms, I have 2 squares, and I want to factor this. So this is going to be a 2x and a 3. And then I write my final answer. If you take out a GCF, it stays in front. All the pieces have to be there. Then I have 2x minus 3, 2x plus 3. Okay, number 7. I think I just have number 7. Okay, so I want you to first look for GCF, and then after you do that, then I want you to try and factor it. Look for GCF first, and then try to factor it. Yeah. Okay, so for GCF, you can take out a 3. You can take out 2 x's and 1 y. Does anyone need me to go over how I found that? And then you divide, so the 3's cancel. I get 2 x's and the y's cancel. Minus 9. The x squareds cancel, and I get 2 y's. And then you always look at the leftover and you say, can I do anything with this? And that'll be a yes. That's our difference of 2 squares that we've been doing. So this is an x and a 3y. So leave the GCF. And then x minus 3y, x plus 3y. out a GCF, make sure that you put it back in your answer. Okay, one more like this, and this is because there's some on your worksheet like this. So even though there's 4s here, it's okay, it's still the same thing. When we do x squared, basically you're taking that 2 and dividing it by a 2, and that's where we get that x from. So if I have x to the 4th, and I say what times what gives me x to the 4th, it's just going to be x squared. So this is going to be 4x squared. And what will the second one be? 9y squared. Okay, so you just take that exponent. I could put x to the 8th there, and then this would be x to the 4th. You just divide it in half. So we have 4x squared minus 9y squared, and 4x squared plus 9y squared. And then look and see, because these are a little bit more complex. Can I do anything with either the first one or the second one? Yeah. Which one? The first one. Why not the second one? Because it's a plus. But this one is also 2 squares. So this is 2x and 3y. So this becomes 2x minus 3y, 2x plus 3y. And there's several on your homework like this where you factor it once, but then you can factor it again. And then this guy right here stays. 4x squared plus 9y squared. So after you factor something on your homework, look and see if you have any squares or GCFs you can take out.
Why would we try to combine these further?
Combine them?
Yeah, like,
Well, if you combine them, like multiply them out, you're just going to go back to the original. So where we had this last chapter or last unit and we went to something like this, we're going the other way now. We're taking this and we're breaking it apart. Okay, so that's squares. So then let's look at cubes. And we're only going to do like 3 of these. So here for cubes, we have sum or difference. Of 2 cubes. So we can have adding or subtracting of things being cubed. So before we talked about difference of squares is very simple. Think of a cube, it's a little more complex, right? So there's a little bit more things to it. The mistake that people make, so the first one we're going to look at is x cubed plus 8. And I want to show you what a lot of people do, and hopefully by showing you this, you won't do it. Okay, so your cubes that you really need to know, I have up to 6 on the board over here. You probably need to know like up to 5 though. Okay, because now you have to change your mindset. 2 to the 3rd is 8. 3 to the 3rd is 27. 4 to the 3rd is 64. And this one I see a lot of mistakes on because 64 is also a perfect square. So people will write 8. It's not 8 if you're doing cubes. And then 5 to the 3rd is 125. Okay, so on here, when we're doing x cubed plus 8, this would be x, and this would be a 2. So what a lot of people will do is just go x plus 2, x plus 2, x plus 2. Remember, we're doing cubes. It's not that simple. Okay, squares are simple. Cubes are not that simple. So I don't want you to do that. Okay, so here's how you're going to do this. X and 2. So when you do a cube, your first one is a binomial, meaning you're going to have 2 terms, one here and one here. And your second one is a trinomial. So I'm going to write a little bit spaced out parentheses, and I'm going to put 3 lines. So in the first one is exactly what we have written here. X, and I put the plus, and then 2. So if this is a plus, then this is a plus. If this was a minus, then this is a minus. Okay, there's a formula for what goes in here, but this is an easier way to remember it, is if you can remember this little acronym SOFAs. And I know it's stupid, but it'll help you remember what goes in there. write it going down like this. So the first s, you're going to square the first term. So that doesn't mean the x cubed. That means after you have this in here, I'm going to square the x. So what does that become? X squared, right. You just square that first term, x squared. The O is opposite sign. So if this is plus, then this is minus. The F, and this is kind of the weird one because it doesn't make a lot of sense with the F, but it's multiply the factors. So basically you multiply the first one by itself, then you multiply the two together. So I'm just going to multiply the 2 and the x together, which becomes 2x. The A is add. And then the second s, square the second term. So 2 squared, or 2 times 2 is 4. So you multiply the first one by itself, multiply the two together, and then multiply the second one by itself. And that's it. That's your answer. The thing I don't want you to do is this. This is incorrect. Okay, so I want you to try this one. X cubed minus 27. So I changed the number on you and I changed the sign, but see if you can set up your 2 parentheses. So you'll have a binomial and then a trinomial. So see if you can set that up. Where? Oh, right here? Because I'm doing cube, I'm saying it has to be 2 times 2 times 2 is what gives me 8. And that's where it's a little tricky. And that's why these 4 numbers up here, or these things, will all be helpful. Because you can see 8, and then I go over here and I say, oh, it's 2. Okay, so when you do, because this one's x squared, so when if I was to multiply this out, I would do x times x squared, that would give me my x cubed. So this one's always the single x, like whatever you get with your little numbers over here, or your letter number. And then this one's always the square. So this should be x and 3. So in our first parentheses, hopefully you have x minus 3. To write this under it, write sofas. So I square the first, so x squared. Opposite sign. Multiply the 2 together, so 3x. Add, and then square the second. Did you get it? We'll do one more. I want to make sure you do one with 2 numbers. Okay, last one. Don't forget to look for GCF first. There's not one on this, but on your worksheet, you will need to look for GCF first on some of them. So we'll have a binomial and trinomial. What do I write under 8x cubed? 2x, good. And under 125? 5, good. Okay, so in the first parentheses, 2x plus 5. one. So here's where you gotta be careful. When we square the first term, a lot of people forget to square the 2 as well. But you gotta square both. So that's 2 squared is 4, and then I have x squared. Make sure you do the number as well. Opposite sign, so subtract. Multiply the 2 together, so what would go in the middle? 10x, good. 10x. And then add. And then square the second term, 25. And that's it. So I'll pass out the worksheet. Make sure that once you factor something, you always go back and look, can I do something else? Number 3, I'm going to write right here so you can see it. What would you factor out of number 3 right here? What's the GCF? Is it 7 or negative 7? Negative, right. If it leads with a negative, take out the negative. Okay? So my key is up in the back from yesterday and today. You guys have to practice